or tentorium cerebelli. Ooh, I hope you read through it last night, because we're going to kind of go pretty fast. But you just will need to open the little package, and once it gets air in it, it's okay. So what we have, folks, we order these specially with the dura mater, with the meninges on. And what are the three meninges, folks?
Dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater.
Very good. Everybody hear that? Dura in the order, and you almost always list them in the order of external most or superficial most to deep. So dura, arachnoid, and pia. And folks, it is mater. It's Latin for mother. Don't spell it M-A-T-T-E-R. It's not matter. You can say dura mater, but spell it with one T, because it's from the Latin for mother. The dura mater is the tough mother, and you can see how tough it is. I mean, it's really even hard to cut into it. And I mean, it's really dense, fibrous, connective tissue that is protective. Okay, so what we're going to do, we see the entire brain is ensheathed in our dura mater. And that dura mater, are there both cranial and spinal meninges, folks?
Yes.
There's both cranial meninges that cover the brain, and then are they continuous one with the other? Because is the cord continuous with the brain?
Yes.
Right, very good. So that was one of the things, and I did start correcting your take-home test 3. I took off if you listed meninges, but you didn't say cranial and spinal meninges. And that was tricky, because up at the top of that question it said covering both brain and cord. So like I say, nobody knew. I keep a few secrets, but anyway. So what we're going to do is, folks, we're going to cut into the dura mater, and you can see that the dura anteriorly, there's some little gaps in it where we are seeing the olfactory bulb. We're seeing the place of synapse of the sensory neurons from what cranial nerve gives rise to, is fed by the nasal nerves through the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone.
The first one.
Is the first one, cranial nerve 1, the olfactory, and then the olfactory bulb, it's called, is the ganglion in which the synapse of those first order sensory neurons, which is called, and anybody remember what functional category smell is? It's special, and it's visceral afferent, folks. Why? Because in order to smell, you've got to solubilize molecules. That's why your nasal mucosa is so moist. You can't smell something if it's not solubilized into the mucosa around the ends of the nasal nerves. Yeah. So okay. So I'm cutting into the dura mater, and also I should say the few things that before you even cut into it. We're also seeing in this case the optic nerve on this side. Okay, the optic nerve, which is encased with dura. Oh, I need a forceps. Sorry. I think we left it up in that. So, unfortunately, on this particular brain, and we have other brains, it's really nice when both optic nerves are there. And this one, a piece of it still remains. You know, it's hard to get a brain out of a skull case, folks. It really is. And so, sometimes things rip and tear. But we have both optic nerves here, and I'm on the inferior aspect of the brain. So we have, there's the left optic nerve, and you can see that it's ensheathed by dura as it came into the skull. It was just, you know, as it exits the bony orbit on the way back, there's really no dura in the orbit, but as it enters the skull, so we've got the dura surrounding the, there's the bright white optic nerve, because that consists of just axons, okay, of those. Well, they're actually dendrites of the neurons in the retina of the eye that come back. But do you see what happens between the the left and the right optic nerve? Is they meet in the middle at a place called the. Did you read this in your write-up of the sheep's dissection? It's called the optic chiasm. Chiasm means area of crossing over. See how the left and the right optic nerves meet in the middle? That's because we have two eyes, but how many images do we form in our brain? One. We want half of the field of view of each eyeball to end up being interpreted on the other side, so we end up with forming one image. You know, people who have double vision, it's because there may be some rupture of that optic chiasm. So they're projecting back just to each side of the brain without the crossover to unite the two. So in any event, there's the optic chiasm. We also have, enclosed with dura, there's what's called the pituitary gland, which is technically isn't part of the brain, but so when you get your brains, folks, and you can feel little shards of bone are still in there. So I'm going to continue cutting to remove the dura, and as I'm doing this, I want to remind us that sheep have very, very, very low gyri, and so they don't have real
Deep sulci?
deep. Thank you. That's what I'm looking. They don't have real deep sulci either. So the idea is, even their median fissure, usually the dura mater surrounds the two hemispheres, and in humans, where it meets in the middle to go down deep into between the two hemispheres of the brain, that's what's called the falx cerebri, and it's just an area of very dense connective tissue of the dura mater, and the falx cerebri anchors anteriorly to, anybody remember the bony landmark you learned on the ethmoid bone that translates as the rooster's comb?
Crista galli.
The crista galli of the ethmoid bone. That's what that's for, folks. That big bony eminence is to anchor, in humans, the falx cerebri. Well, you can see in sheep, because even their fissure, median fissure isn't very deep, and I'm going to cut along both sides. Actually, I'm just going to cut along the dura posteriorly here, not quite to the cerebellum. Let me get going this way. You can see that they don't have a falx cerebri. In other words, their dura is fairly flat across the midline. See on this portion? Because their fissure isn't all that deep, so they don't need one. But we do. We have and falx means sickle-shaped. And why is the falx sickle-shaped? Because when we do, I'm not going to do a mid-sagittal suture just yet. Let me do this first. What's the next layer under the dura?
Arachnoid.
Is the arachnoid mater. And folks, the arachnoid mater is this, especially in the areas of the sulci where there's a little bit of gap between the gyri. See how I can just get under there, and there's just a little bit of glistening stuff. You can, as I lift this up, you can just barely see a little bit of glistening tissue. If I get a little air under there, and if I hit with the light just right, that's arachnoid mater. And folks, it's in the arachnoid mater where the blood vessels are. That's why you're seeing a little bit of blood that was left in some of the little veins. That's why you see the little dark. But that's exactly the layer in which those blood vessels are. There I'm pulling a significant piece of arachnoid mater up. Now, if I pull that up and then try to reflect that back, we can actually pull that off, and so now the glistening sort of quality goes away. And what are we left with? What's the layer deep to the arachnoid mater? See how I sometimes get lucky and can pull fairly large pieces. The pia is so inexorably connected to the neurons of the cortex, because that's gray matter, folks. Those are cell bodies of neurons that, in which the synapses project to different parts of the brain that interpret or initiate motor outflow. And so there's no subpial space. There was a subdural space, and then there's a subarachnoid space, which of course we're going to find out circulates cerebrospinal fluid, but there's no subpial space, because as soon as you start peeling pia away, you're doing damage to the cell bodies of the neurons, of the gray matter, of the cortex, cerebral cortex, yeah? So, okay. So those are the three meninges. So if I just kind of with my thumb do a blunt dissection down to where you can, if you peer down into here, I'll see it on my gloves, are a little too big. But can you see that bright white right there? I get the light. Boy, this light on this side of the room is really bad. See the really bright white structure? And all you're seeing is sort of the top of this bright white structure, folks, that's called the corpus callosum. It translates the colossal body. See that really bright white? Well, remember, the cortex is gray matter, but are the two hemispheres connected to each other? And so that bright white matter means myelinated. And indeed, the right and the left hemisphere have what are called association tracts with each other. And I saw you with that, could you hand me that wall poster thing? Oh, thanks, dear Dwayne. The corpus callosum, folks, from a lateral view, I'm going to hold it over here.